15 years ago, Emma had the misfortune of meeting Dave. She was new to riding the bus to school and didn't happen to know anyone, so she sat by herself. She could feel someone was watching her from behind, so she turned a couple times to look, and that's when she saw Dave. He had brown curly hair and turned away every time she caught him staring. He told Emma she had nice hair and he liked her t-shirt. He asked right off the bat if she would be his girlfriend. Emma said absolutely not. She didn't even know him and his creepy staring made her uncomfortable. Well, Emma had pointed him out to a few people in school and everyone she talked to said he was the nicest person they'd ever met and just a bit of an odd duck. Next thing she knows, Dave had joined her photography class and after-school programs. She saw him around every corner and in every hallway of the school. He started popping up to try and hug Emma and tickle her. When she found out he was telling people he was her boyfriend, Emma knew she needed to put her foot down. He kept asking for hugs, and she refused. And that's when things took a turn. Suddenly, anonymous notes were popping up in Emma's locker. Most of the notes said, "always," and nothing else. Some had longer declarations of love. The simplicity of the message gave her chills, and it had to be Dave. Her suspicions were confirmed when pictures of herself began showing up along with the notes. The pictures were all taken from a slight distance, and she finally got scared. One Sunday afternoon, as Emma was watching TV in her bed, she heard Dave's voice next to the bedroom window. He said he watched her walk home one day to see where she lived and wanted to stop by for a visit. He said he knew she wouldn't let him in, so he figured he'd just stop by the window to talk. He quickly left, but now it got serious and adults needed to be involved. Emma's mom thought she was exaggerating. She acknowledged the notes and pictures as weird, but nothing other than a serious infatuation. So, Emma went to Mr. K, who also had Dave as a student, and noticed some of his obsessive behavior and didn't doubt her story for a moment. He spoke to Dave's guidance counselor, and they both sat down with him, telling him that he was making Emma uncomfortable and to stop. This angered Dave. He stormed up to her in the lobby of the school with a glass rose in his hand and threw it at the wall behind her. He screamed in Emma's face about how she had broken his heart just like the rose. Mr. K had to break up the situation, and a few days later, he dropped out of school and Emma went 8 years without seeing Dave. Emma was craving some mac and cheese one day and hit up a popular spot in town to grab some to go. She looked behind the counter and there's Dave. Emma had no idea he was working there and debated leaving for a moment. Middle school was so long ago and she hadn't heard from him since that day in the lobby. Surely this guy cannot still have this obsession with Emma. It was a huge relief when another register opened and a young woman took her order. She wondered if he was even mortified and didn't want to interact. Well, Dave seemed to take Emma's visit as a sign that she was ready to love him. Emma got a friend request from him that night and immediately deleted it. A few nights later, she's getting home and walking on the street when she sees that someone is standing on the side of her house. She gets into the house quickly, locks everything, and watches. And then she sees him, his curly brown hair. Emma called the police and reported this, but of course, there wasn't much they could do. There was no proof, and he hadn't approached her or tried to get in. They did agree to keep someone on lookout in the area, and she had police patrolling more than usual the following nights. But eventually, the police patrol died down, and that's when the late-night knocking began. She could hear it softly on windows and occasionally on the back door, but never dared to answer or get close enough to look. It wasn't every night, maybe 2 or 3 nights a week. The police never seemed to be close enough in the area when it happened, so they couldn't catch him. A couple weeks after the knocking began, Emma received an envelope wedged into the screen door, full of the creepy candid pictures from middle school and another note that said, "Always." She had enough and wanted to have some official record of what was happening. And that's when Emma saw the word "always" carved into her car's back bumper. Emma lost it, and in her rage, she took a picture of the police station sign and the report being filed and sent them over to Dave over Facebook. And she told him to leave her alone, that the police were involved and things will only get worse if he continues. And to her surprise, he simply responded, "You're right." And just like that, he disappeared. Was the mac and cheese worth it? Definitely not. And ever since that day, Emma never saw Dave again. Jen and her husband Dan were at the supermarket when their baby was being especially fussy. He took her for a 10-minute drive to calm her down and came back into the parking lot waiting for Jen to finish shopping for groceries. Dan was taking a business call and sat down absentmindedly rocking the baby when a woman approached them. It's not uncommon for people to ask to play with their baby. She's got big rosy cheeks, soft wisps of gold hair, and the most adorable grisly toothless grin. But her nap schedule was paramount, so he was preparing to tell the woman she actually couldn't play with the baby right then. She walked over, brimming with confidence, and before Dan could even finish his sentence, she picked up the carrier and started walking off. Dan was in shock and said, "Excuse me, put her down." She started walking away more briskly. Dan tried to grapple the carrier out of her hands, resulting to restraining her arms. This woman yells, "Help! He's trying to take my baby! Kidnapping! 911! Help!" kicking him in the shin and pulling a pink bottle of pepper spray out of her handbag. Unsurprisingly, no one in the parking lot was clocking the earlier interaction and assumed he was really a kidnapper. Immediately, a man knocked Dan to the ground and was holding him down, telling him that the police was being called. He was telling everyone in the parking lot it's his daughter, but no one was listening. "I have pictures of the baby on my phone." This, however, didn't translate well, because everyone interpreted it as him having stalking photos of the baby. It was at this point that another man kicked Dan as hard as he could in the ribs. At this time, Jen came out of the store and she thought he was being robbed by these people. She was yelling for security, panicking, and when she saw that her baby was being held by a woman, she was relieved. Jen thought maybe her daughter was moved out of harm's way whilst her husband was being robbed. She couldn't find a security guard outside the store, and so she ran up to the people holding her husband down, waving her wallet, pleading, "Take everything you want, just leave us alone." The man said, "Lady, we need to wait for the police to deal with him." Jen was confused as to why muggers have called the police. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" And made out someone saying, "He tried to abduct that woman's kid. Her husband would never hurt a child." She kept trying to understand what the man was saying, and suddenly, it all clicked. She looked around for the woman who had her baby, and she was halfway across the parking lot. Jen went ballistic and sprinted across right to her. All she could think to do was to grab the woman by her hair and squeeze her throat with her other arm. She yanked her hair as hard as she could, and that was enough to make her drop the carrier. She was so scared and surprised she threw herself on top, and when she looked up, the woman left. Not one person tried to stop her, and within the next couple minutes, police had arrived. There were still several bystanders who explained it as her husband trying to kidnap the baby. The police's first questions when asking for her description weren't investigative. They were questions thinly veiled, trying to convince Jen not to pursue charges, still placing blame on her husband. Do your husband and the baby look dissimilar? Is there a chance she thought he was abducting the baby and she was trying to intervene? Could your husband have been doing something inappropriate or violent to the baby that would make her feel compelled to extricate the baby from the situation? Did she seem groggy or confused? Could she have mistaken either of them for her own family members? They spent more time verifying that the baby was actually Jen's instead of focusing on the kidnapper. Her husband had called his brother at that point, who works in an office with a lot of lawyers, and connected with one ASAP. And they gave him the priceless advice to get every officer's name and badge number, to request copies of the store's security tapes right away, and to escalate the complaint higher up the chain if these officers weren't taking them seriously. Finally, Jen and Dan had enough reason to believe they were being taken seriously, and they went home. Dan was seething with rage and grappling with a feeling of helplessness from how little he was able to do, and has 2 cracked ribs from when the man kicked him. There were still people who stuck around to talk to the police who were giving the husband dirty looks, and one man even implored the police to involve CPS to verify that it was really their baby. So to the parking lot kidnapper and the parking lot skeptics, they better hope that Jen and Dan never sees them again. When Lucy turned 13, she moved with her father to Japan from Colombia due to his job. They arrived to Shizuoka Prefecture and rented a small house to live in. Her dad did research work at one of the universities while Lucy attended a school at Shizuoka closest to their home. During the first week, her dad was able to drive Lucy to school and also to pick her up after. Things were going fine. She started to make new friends, her Japanese was improving, and overall had a great time. But then, Lucy's dad started to work more hours, and in order to spend the weekends with her, he decided to change his routine, meaning he wouldn't be able to drive her or pick her up from school anymore. Lucy had no problem being on her own, and she reassured him that everything was going to be okay. The first 2 weeks walking alone was perfectly fine, until the Tuesday of the 3rd week. Lucy was on her usual route to school, and then a man around his 30s approached her with a kind smile on his face. He greeted her in English and started to say things such as, "It's a nice day," "I should have brought my dog," and "I remember I used to take this way to school." Lucy tried to be polite since it was common to have people from the area approaching her and her dad for small talk. And since Japanese people are so kind and polite, she did the same as well. She told this man that she really needed to hurry for school. He looked at her, quite disappointed, but smiled again and said, "Oh sure, you must be a really good student. Always on time, I hope to see you again." The next day, she saw him again. This time, he told her that he actually had seen Lucy and her dad since they arrived, and how he noticed that her dad was no longer driving her to school. He then handed her a plastic bag full of candies and cookies. After that, he finally let her go. In the bag, there were also notes that said, "Have a nice day at school. You are smart. You are pretty." The following day, Lucy decided to confront him. Before he offered one of his gifts, she stopped him and told him he made her uncomfortable and to stop being around her. And all of a sudden, he snapped, and the man started yelling at Lucy, saying she's ungrateful, that she was mistaking their friendship. He pretended to be hurt, and Lucy fell for it. "I should have told my father before," Lucy said. "I should have told him everything." Initially, she felt embarrassed and wanted to resolve the problem by herself. One day, her class had a school trip to the Aokigahara forest. The trip was going well. They were walking near the area of the forest and the surroundings, and were divided by groups of 10 with one teacher at the head. It was going to be a long walk, so everyone was told to go to the restroom beforehand. Each of the students were wearing identification, and when they came back, Lucy suddenly realized that she lost hers, and thought to run back to the restroom to check and see if she dropped it just before her teacher would notice and scold her for losing it. After checking the restroom and not finding her ID, she decided to give up and get back to her group. But then, the guy appeared again. He greeted Lucy and then asked, "What are you doing here?" Feeling shocked and freaked out to see him, Lucy told him that she was in a school trip and that she needed to hurry up and get back to find her group. But before she could get away from him, he said, "Don't you need your ID?" Lucy froze. She looked back at him, and he smiled, then said, "I found it on the ground. I recognized your pretty face, so I put it in my car. Let's go get it before you get in trouble." At this point, Lucy was terrified. He started to look more sinister, and she couldn't say anything. Seeing she wasn't responding, the man grabbed her arm and began to pull her. Lucy snapped and freed from his grip and started to run away. He followed behind, running fast while calling out, "Lucy-chan! Lucy-chan, what are you doing? Come back here!" She continued running. She didn't realize that she entered the forest and was now without direction. After running for who knows how long, she no longer heard the man's voice. Her whole body felt heavy, and Lucy couldn't catch her breath. She looked around and everything seemed the same. There was silence. She continued walking for a while until she came across a tending camp. Lucy felt relief when she saw a man come out. She proceeded to tell him everything that happened. He seemed confused and a bit scared of her. But after seeing Lucy crying, he changed his expression to a more warming one. He listened to everything quietly until she finished. They both agreed to call the cops and alert the authorities of the place. Thankfully, he knew the way back to the entrance of the forest, and 2 of the forest keepers were walking there. His name is Yuki, and Yuki told them in Japanese everything that Lucy had told him. The forest keepers brought them to an information area where they called the police and told them to wait there. They also sent other forest keepers to look for the classmates and alert them about the guy. Meanwhile, Yuki tried to comfort Lucy, telling her what he was doing in the woods. He said that his younger brother passed away 5 years ago, and since then, he's been going to the forest on his brother's birthday to honor him. When the police arrived, she told the officer everything that happened while another group of police officers searched the area. They finally found the guy in the forest. They arrested him and searched his car for evidence, and found tape, rope, and a knife. She thanked Yuki for saving her life, and shortly after, the trip ended and the school called her father. He immediately rushed to the school, but he didn't scold Lucy that day. He just hugged her, and she cried on his shoulder. Jane had been in Korea for the semester as part of her major in university. She wanted to have some sort of romantic experience in Korea, and her friend recommended her to use a dating app to meet English-speaking Koreans. That way she could meet someone and experience the dating culture. About 3 weeks later, she met a guy named Tim on the app. He eagerly wanted to meet for a date, and he seemed nice, but she should have asked more questions, and he didn't give many details about himself. Tim was a guy a bit older than her, and claimed he was a college student. Jane assumed he had done his military time and returned to school. He wanted to come to her place originally to pick her up, but Jane lived in an all-women's dorm and didn't want him to know exactly where she lived since they were still strangers. So instead, she insisted they meet at the main town center near the subway. Tim really didn't like this idea, which looking back was a red flag, but she insisted. The night of the date, Jane waited an hour for this guy. Why was he so late, she thought. Tim weirdly claimed that he just wanted to make her wait. She thought he was kidding and messaged him a laughing emoji, assuming he was just lost. When he finally arrived, he was much smaller than she thought. But a man's height was never something she cared much about. He was also quite thin. Maybe Jane let her guard down because she didn't see him as physically threatening. Right off the bat, he was way too touchy and breathed creepily and heavily. Jane was so off-put with his demeanor and felt odd about the situation. Then, the first thing he said to her was, "You're not as white as I thought you were." Jane thought this was a translation error, but his English was near perfect, so she asked him for clarification, and he said, "I thought you would be more white. Are you pure European?" Now she was officially weirded out. Why does he care in the first place anyway? Why does her skin color matter to this guy? He kept talking about how he wished the color of her eyes were darker, but then she brushed it off as him being nervous and trying to start a conversation. When they arrived at the tea place, she tried to order a basic raspberry tea, but he stopped her and told Jane that she had to have this special one. He really insisted she only ordered that type of drink. She was weirded out by it, but went along. After, he asked if they could look around Jane's school. It was dark, but the school is well lit, so she agreed. And the whole time they walked around, he would randomly stop and grab her for long hugs. He kept grabbing and breathing hard into her neck. It was so awkward. and she stalked him. He also wouldn't tell any personal details about himself. He even said at one point, "I'm a mysterious man." And he also said something like, "You look so much like my favorite movie character." And Jane asked, "Who?" But he said she would have to figure it out on her own. Finally, he said, "I want to go to a dark area." He somehow knew there was a wooded area behind Jane's campus. Jane said no, and that she wanted to stay near the main campus in town. But he kept pushing. Finally, he grabbed her arm and said, "I can't let anyone see." Jane ripped her arm away and began to go back to the main road, and he followed. He was pleading with Jane to stay. She told him she would message him, lying obviously, saying anything to get him to leave. Suddenly, he leans towards Jane, and she thinks he's going to kiss her, but it was so much worse. Instead, she felt pain in her face. It took her a second to realize that he was biting her face. He leaned his head sideways and bit on Jane's nose and cheek as hard as he could. She screamed and pushed him away from her. His face looked so freaky and she barely had time to react in words. Instead, Jane ran up to the sidewalk until she saw a convenience store on the right. She ran to the back of the store and bent down, freaked out. The owner started to yell at her, but she couldn't explain the situation. She just begged him in English to let her stay. After waiting for some time, she realized that Tim didn't end up following her. Jane peered outside the store and didn't see him, and she immediately texted her friend to take her back to the dorm. On the way back, Jane messaged Tim again and basically told him to stay away from her and something along the lines of calling the police if he continued to stalk her. And then she blocked him. She was so thankful that she never let him pick her up at the dorm. Jane also called her mom and told her everything that happened, when suddenly she said, "Wait, what did he ask you?" She then put some details together and realized that all these weird things had to do with the 50 Shades of Grey books. The eye color, the way he dressed, and the tea he made her drink, and the random lines he said, it all matches his little fantasy. It was so creepy. But that was the last time that Jane ever saw Tim again. On a happier note, this bad experience didn't stop Jane. She eventually met someone else in Korea and they ended up falling in love. They even did the whole long distance thing and now she's living in Korea, studying and working. It's been years since this whole strange encounter, but if she ever runs into him again, Tim, you're gonna get your ass kicked. Harry's best friend Mari is an Instagram influencer. Not big time, but big enough to get free stuff and has gotten 2 sponsored trips. One day, a boutique hotel from Miami contacted her via Instagram DMs and offered her an all-expenses-paid trip to Miami for Memorial Weekend, in exchange for her to be in a hotel and take pics and do a couple of stories. She was told she could bring a female friend with her if she wanted to and everything would be covered for her. This was her first time doing this, so at the time, she wasn't really sure of how it worked. The company sent her a contract for her to sign, and it said she'd be responsible for paying for her plane ticket to Miami, and that she would be reimbursed for it later. This was to prevent a no-show, meaning the influencer gets the ticket purchased by the hotel and the influencer never shows up, so it seemed reasonable. She invited Harry instead of a female friend because she was nervous about the whole thing, and they figured it wouldn't be a big deal. Worst case scenario, they don't pay for Harry's plane ticket, but they can cover it for themselves. Mari then signed the contract and everything was set to go. On the day of the trip, they arrived to Miami safely. Harry and Mari were supposed to be picked up by the hotel at the airport. They walked around the terminal and that's when Mari saw a guy holding a sign with her last name and the paper has the hotel logo. They were greeted and then escorted to a black SUV. Here is where it gets weird. As soon as they got into the car, they noticed that the driver is visibly upset. Harry and Mari thought he was talking to the guy who walked them over, but he was talking to Mari. He had a very thick accent and was wearing dark shades. He was telling Mari that she was not allowed to bring her boyfriend and that she said it was 2 girls. 2 girls. Hotel told me 2 girls. No 1 guy, 1 girl, 2 girls. He was demanding to see where the other girl was. They were speechless and confused. The guy who walked them to the car looked annoyed. He got into the passenger seat and started to fight with the driver in Portuguese. Then he turns to them and asks where the other girl is at. Mari, feeling very upset by now, tells them that there is no other girl, that she is Mari and Harry is just a friend coming with her on a trip. The guy in the driver's seat gets out, tosses their luggage out of the car and says, "This is some bullshit." He gets in the car and immediately they take off. And that was it. Harry and Mari were in complete shock. She immediately emails Melissa, the PR person they have been in contact with this entire time, to tell her what happened. No response. They decided to take a cab and show up to the hotel. And when they finally got there, everything made sense. The hotel had been rebranded and had a completely different name, owner, and staff. Harry showed them the hotel's Instagram profile, and indeed, that was the hotel it used to be. But not the new one. This hotel never contacted them. They never did anything. Whoever was in charge of the old IG account of the old hotel did, or whoever got a hold of it did. And mind you, this was a somewhat big hotel account with over 10,000 followers. It was real. But upon further inspection, Harry and Mari realized that the pictures were really old, and so were the posts. Mari felt like an idiot and couldn't believe that they actually got into this situation. They called the police, met up with the detective, but nothing ever came out of it. They investigated who was running the account before or who had access to it. However, none of the people who used to run the account had anything to do with it. Nothing ever came out of this. When Rae was 11 years old, her parents had to go to an emergency trip to her grandparents' house, but she had school and basketball practice in the mornings, so she couldn't go. Their house alarm was broken, so Rae's dad told her where his hidden pistol was and made sure she knew to call 911 if something were to occur and to immediately call him after. Rae's dad had always been somewhat paranoid, but their house was in a suburban area that wasn't known to have crime, so she didn't think too much of it. Her parents left after work on Friday. Everything was fine all night and all day Saturday. Rae's bedtime was usually around 11 p.m., but because she had the whole house to herself, she stayed up until around 2 a.m. before she got tired and finally went to bed. It had only been an hour or so since falling asleep when suddenly, Rae heard a random loud pop from outside her room. The sound was from the front door. Rae didn't think too much of it at first because on windy nights there were times when the door would be pushed just slightly and it would make that sound. But there was no wind. Even still, she wasn't very worried. There was again, followed by a bunch of quiet clicking noises. Rae started getting annoyed thinking that it was the neighborhood stoner kids just messing around in the middle of the night, which they were known for doing so she got out of bed and went outside the room. Her bedroom door has a loud pop to it when opened, louder than the front door, and it can be heard throughout the entire house. Suddenly, the clinking noises stopped, but Rae still felt the need to check it out. There were high shrubs outside her bedroom window, so she couldn't really see outside very well. She went out to the living room and peered through the blinds and choked up when she noticed the hooded figure peek over from the side of the entrance. Someone was trying to pick the lock and break into her house. Rae's mind was racing. He had to have noticed the blinds move, but maybe he ran off. Rae held her breath for a moment and stayed completely still. Not even a minute later, the clinking returned, but more furiously. This psycho was still trying to break in. In her panicked state, she didn't think about calling the police or her dad. A sudden rage came over Rae, and she just wanted to get rid of this guy. She grabbed a can of hairspray in her bathroom, and because of Rae's love for candles, Rae had a lighter in her room as well. She raced back to the door and in one swift motion, unlocked it, yanking it open, and lit that burglar up while screaming at the top of her lungs. She couldn't see the guy well in the darkness and past the flame, but Rae heard a loud scream of anguish. It didn't take long for the neighbors to hear her and turn on their porch lights, which is when she suddenly collected herself and let go of the lighter switch. But when she opened her eyes, there was no one there. The guy quickly ran out of there, and Rae's neighbors had come outside in a light panic and called the police. Her parents were also called, and she explained to them and the police what had happened. But unfortunately, because it was so dark, she couldn't identify him. Rae's mom was freaking out about it, but her dad said he was proud and told her to get some sleep after everything. But that was impossible. She stayed up the entire night thinking about it. The next day, Rae got a call from her parents saying that the officers had caught the guy. A patrol car had noticed someone smoking in a nearby park under the playground, and the officers approached the suspect. Assuming it was one of the stoner kids, they expected him to run. But to their surprise, he approached them and was begging for help. They saw that his entire arm was burnt to a crisp, and when they searched his backpack, they found enough evidence to arrest the guy. And thankfully, he never returned.